This is Speaking with the Enemy on the Ticats Audio Network. Here is Louis Butko.
Yes, the show is Speaking with the Enemy. The enemy this week, the Montreal Alouettes. And to discuss that, we bring in their digital content reporter, Joey Alfieri. And Joey, this team's playing with a lot of confidence coming off a pretty big win last week.
Yeah, they are. The offense has really gotten going. And they had some red zone issues at the beginning of the season, but in the last couple of weeks, Anthony Calvillo's been calling the plays, and they've really sorted that out. I think they're 9 for 11 in the red zone in those two games. Defensively, still, a little bit of a work in progress, but things have gotten better. They came up with a huge turnover in the Ottawa game that led to the what ended up being the winning touchdown. So things are coming along nicely here in Montreal.
Trevor Harris coming off a CFL top performer for week 7. What's been the key to his success? Is it Calvillo calling the plays? Is it an improved play from him? What have you seen from Trevor Harris?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. I think they kind of put him in a real comfortable spot, and he's been executing the game plan. I think, if you follow Trevor Harris's career, you realize that when the ball comes out of his hands quickly, that's when he's more efficient. So, the protection has been there. The protection's also been aided by the fact that he is getting the ball out quickly. And I think in the last couple of weeks, you saw it last week, they've distributed the ball real well. I think they had 8 different guys catch a pass last week. They targeted 9 different players. Hergy Mayala had a big game. So Reggie White also had a big game. And, that's what Geno Lewis catching a touchdown and catching a 2-point convert. But I think he had less than 40 yards in the game. Jake Winicki's gotten more and more involved. So he's spreading the ball around. He took care of the football last week. He's been on point. He's been vintage Trevor Harris, and I'd expect that to continue.
You mentioned Jake Winicki because he was a player everybody was watching this year, sort of in the same vein of like Tim White and Stephen Dunbar, how they were going to make the jump with a new season. So I know it started a little bit slower for Jake, but how has he progressed and how important is it for him and Trevor to find chemistry on and off the field for this team to be successful?
Yeah, I think it's really important. He's going into this year. He was clearly their number 2 guy behind Geno Lewis, led the CFL in touchdowns a year ago. So that's how important he is. He's a physically imposing guy, has really good hands. And I know people are going to look at the numbers and they're going to say, well, it's not the Jake Winicki we're accustomed to seeing. I think you're starting to see it come around. And for those who are outside of Montreal, maybe don't realize, but he missed a real big chunk of training camp because of an injury. So I think that contributes to the slow-ish kind of start. But he's had, solid days at the office in 2 of the last 3 games. So I think you're starting to see it come around. He made that great one-handed catch in a clutch moment in Ottawa last week in the 4th quarter. So he's a guy who's just starting to round into form, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw him get even more touches in the red zone. Had the 2-point convert last week, but I think you'll see him be utilized in the red zone.
Let's stick with the offense. How big of an impact is Sean Jamieson coming back? What does that mean for this offensive line?
Yeah, he's a veteran guy. He's a leader. He's the guy who's going to, call out the signals. He has that experience. I think David Brown, former Western Mustang, did a real good job in Jamison's absence. And now, David Brown goes to being the 6th lineman again. In my opinion, he's the best 6th lineman in the league. He's a guy who can probably start on most teams in the CFL. But, getting Jamison back, he is a guy who's been there, done that, came back a lot sooner than initially anticipated. I think they thought he'd be out 6 to 8 weeks, and he's back after just 4 weeks, missed 3 games. So that'll be good for, especially against a Hamilton team that has a real good front 7. I think anytime you can get your big starting 5 back, I think you want to go into a road game, especially with that.
Speaking of front 7, let's talk about Montreal's front 7. Don Jackson today had a lot of good things to say about Armando Sewell and what he's capable of doing. Obviously, those guys saw a lot of each other back in their Calgary and Edmonton days. I'm sure he would admit last season, and maybe fans would agree with this, last season was not what he was expecting, in terms of totals, but he really seems to have started this year a lot stronger.
Yeah, I still thought he was pretty good last year, to be honest with you. But, Mondo's still getting that push up the middle, man. He's just we saw a couple weeks ago in Regina when he was away from the team for personal reasons. It's just the defensive line isn't the same without him. I think there's guys there that are good and productive, but I just think that he commands a lot of the attention when he's in there. And this, an underrated part of his game that most people probably won't realize unless you're in Montreal and you watch week in, week out, is on short yardage on offense. Like Dom Davis has had an unbelievable season in short yardage. He's great at it. But, if you take a look, especially from the 1 yard line, the push that Sewell typically gets on the left-hand side is absolutely ridiculous. So, he doesn't just do it on the defensive line. He also does it in protection on the offensive line as well, which is fun to see. But for a guy in his mid-30s, man, this guy can still play. He's a disruptor on the interior, and he's still a handful to deal with.
Yeah, using him like we've seen the Ticats use Julian House there on that offensive line as an O-lineman, big, strong guys doing stuff. Let's talk about the linebackers, because a couple of times this week when asking about scouting, they're I don't want to say inexperienced, but let's call it an experience. They're a young group. What have you seen from them, though, as somebody who's been watching them day in and day out?
Yeah, well, I think, linebackers, they're a little banged up at that position group as a whole. Darius Pickett came back. He's been outstanding. I mean, Pickett moved around the defense last year. They had him all over the place. This year, with Patrick Levels, with the team letting Patrick Levels walk in free agency, they put Pickett at Sam linebacker. And I mean, he's been at a different level. I mean, he's been so good. He's so physical. And he's really stood out. So he's healthy. He's back. In the middle, you're going to have Micah Awe, guy who's been around the CFL, been around the NFL as well, had a real good game in Ottawa, had the fumble recovery that he nearly scored on, made some big tackles, also makes an impact on special teams. He's a guy who's fit in real nicely. I know there's a lot of Alouettes fans that were concerned when the team released Trey Watson, but, I think in limited duty, he's probably made more big plays than Watson did at the beginning of the year. It's nothing against Watson. He's a real good player. But, I think Micah Awe might fit the defense a little bit better. And on the weak side, I mean, they're down to number 3 on the depth chart. Chris Ackey's been out. And last week, Terrell Richards, the first overall pick, went out as well. So now they're going to be rotating between a former Ticat and Tyrese Beverette, who's been just an absolute monster on special teams. And he's made some plays on D as well this year. But it looks like he's going to get the bulk of the snaps. And I'd expect to see former Carabin from the University of Montreal, Brian Haralimana. He's another guy. He's a core special teams guy, but a guy who's made some plays on defense too. They're probably going to rotate in depending on what the ratio looks like at different times throughout the game. But that's kind of what the linebackers are going to look like. They're a little banged up, but it's thankfully one of the positions they're pretty deep at.
And before I let you go, all week this week, we've heard the Ticats talk about how important this game is, and A, because of their record, but B, because it's the first of a big stretch of divisional games for this team. Has that been echoed in Montreal? Do they understand the divisional importance of a game like this, or because they have those 2 wins, it's not as I don't want to say panicky, but it's not as discussed, I guess, this week?
No, I think this team really wants to get on a roll, and I think the huge aspect of this one, it's not just an East Division class, it's an ability for the Alouettes to put a little bit of distance between themselves, the Tiger Cats, and the Red Blacks. So, if a Montreal win on Thursday night would mean that you're 2 games ahead of Hamilton, and that you're at least 2 games ahead, 2 or 3 games ahead, depending on the Argo Red Black situation on Sunday ahead of the Red Blacks. So, I think it's, as big as it is for Hamilton, I think it's just as big for Montreal. Montreal made that coaching change a couple of weeks ago. It feels like they're ready to go on a run, but winning in Hamilton is never easy. It took overtime last year to get the job done last October. So, and then I don't have to tell you what happened in the playoffs.
Okay, I was about to bring it up, but I'm glad you did.
It's fine. I was going to bring it up. It's all good. But yeah, it's never an easy place to play. The crowd's obviously real passionate. It gets real windy at times. So I think it's going to take a perfect game from the Alouettes to get the job done. But yeah, I think just to answer your question, yeah, they realize how important this one is.
Well, we'll see how it all plays out on Thursday. Ticats, Alouettes. This has been Speaking with the Enemy this week. Joey Alfieri. Thanks for doing this, Joey.
Thank you.
From all of us here at the Ticats Audio Network, I'm Louis Butko. Hope you have a great day.